my parents invited me to a family gathering with warm smiles, home-cooked food, and assurances that everyone needed to be there. By the end of that dinner, I realized I hadn't been invited to celebrate anything. I had been invited to witness my own family quietly erase me. If you've ever wondered how betrayal can arrive wearing a smile, stay with me until the end. Before we begin, tell me where you're watching from, and if you're new here, don't forget to subscribe because this story changed my life forever. My name is Harper Hale, and I once believed my parents loved my brother, my sister, and me equally. That belief shattered on a quiet Saturday afternoon when I drove 2 hours to my childhood home with my husband, Graham. The house felt warm, filled with the familiar aroma of roast chicken, and everyone appeared unusually cheerful. My brother Weston sat back as though he fully belonged there, while my younger sister Marlo barely looked up from her phone. Once dinner began, my father stood and announced that he and my mother had finalized their estate plans. The house, the dealership, their savings, and the lake property would all go to Weston and Marlo. My name was never mentioned. My mother simply smiled and said, "You're already successful, Harper. You don't need any of it." I quietly set my fork down, realizing I had never truly known the family sitting across from me. The drive home felt longer than the 2 hours it had taken to get there. I stared out the window while Graham kept his eyes on the road, giving me the silence I needed. My parents' words echoed in my mind. They believed I didn't need anything because I had built a successful life. What they never stopped to ask was how that life had been built or how many times I had sacrificed my own comfort to protect theirs. I started my marketing agency when I was 26 with only $4,000, an old laptop, and more determination than experience. I worked late into the night, accepted every project I could find, and slowly built a business that earned respect. My parents rarely asked about my struggles. Whenever they called, it was usually because they needed help. Years earlier, when my father's dealership faced serious financial trouble, I quietly transferred $18,000 so he could pay his employees before Christmas. He thanked me privately, but the rest of the family never learned where the money came from. Later, when my mother's second hip surgery left unexpected medical bills, I covered nearly $9,000 without asking for repayment. While I worked to build stability, Weston received chance after chance at the dealership despite poor results. Marlo drifted from one job to another, always finding another check waiting from our parents whenever life became difficult. I never complained because I believed family helped one another without keeping score. The only person who truly noticed the difference was my grandmother, Opal. She often watched everything quietly before sharing her thoughts. One afternoon she looked at me and said, "You're carrying this family on your shoulders, Harper. One day they'll realize who has been holding everything together." After she passed away 2 years earlier, I never forgot those words. Sitting in my driveway that night after the dinner, another memory surfaced. She had once mentioned a leather folder she kept hidden away, saying it would belong to me when the time was right. For the first time since her funeral, I wondered whether that moment had finally arrived. The next morning, I woke up with one clear decision. I wasn't going to argue with my parents or beg them to change their minds. If they believed I deserved nothing, no emotional speech would suddenly make them see my value. Instead, I wanted to understand why everything had happened the way it did. The first person I called was my closest friend, Ivy Sutter. We had met in business school years earlier, and over time she had become an experienced attorney specializing in estate and business law. More importantly, she was someone who always dealt with facts instead of emotions. I told her everything that had happened at the family dinner. She listened patiently without interrupting. When I finally finished, she asked one question that caught me off guard. "Harper, do you actually want the inheritance or do you want the truth?" I sat quietly for a moment before answering. The house, the lake property, and even the dealership were never what mattered most to me. What hurt was discovering that my own family had made such an important decision without even speaking to me. I wanted honesty more than money. Ivy explained that my father's announcement at dinner had no legal effect by itself. Only the official estate documents carried legal authority. She also reminded me about something I had completely forgotten. Nearly 10 years earlier, my father had restructured the dealership after facing legal and financial difficulties. Because my credit was excellent and my finances were stable, he had asked me to co-sign important loan documents. I had signed them without hesitation because I trusted him completely. That conversation pushed me to search through the storage boxes in our garage for my copy of the paperwork. Hours passed before I finally found the file. As I reached for it, another sealed envelope caught my attention. It was tucked inside an old box of family keepsakes, and my grandmother's familiar handwriting covered the front. My heart began racing before I even opened it. Somehow I knew this wasn't an ordinary letter. Whatever Opal had left behind had survived untouched for years, waiting quietly until I was finally ready to discover it. I carefully unfolded the letter, recognizing my grandmother's neat handwriting the moment I saw the first line. It felt as though she were sitting beside me once again, speaking in the calm voice that had always made every problem seem smaller. As I read each page, tears filled my eyes, not because of sadness alone, but because someone in my family had truly understood me. Opal wrote that she had watched our family for many years. She had seen me solve problems without asking for praise and sacrifice my own time and money whenever someone else needed help. She also admitted that she worried my kindness was being mistaken for endless obligation. She wanted me to know that she had never overlooked those quiet acts, even when everyone else seemed to. Attached to the letter was a legal document that completely changed my understanding of everything. Years earlier, my grandmother had established a private trust using her personal savings. Even more surprising, she had quietly purchased a minority ownership stake in my father's dealership when the business was first getting started. Almost no one knew she still owned that share. According to the documents, both the trust and her ownership interest had been transferred directly to me after her passing. They were completely separate from my parents' estate, meaning no one else had the authority to give them away or remove my name from them. The following morning, I contacted the attorney listed in the paperwork. His name was Foster Bramwell, and he confirmed every detail. He explained that my grandmother had created the arrangement years earlier because she wanted to ensure her wishes could never be changed by family pressure or future disagreements. For the first time since that painful dinner, I felt something stronger than disappointment. I finally had certainty. My grandmother had believed in me long before anyone else questioned my place in the family. I thanked Foster for his time and carefully placed every document back into the folder. Then I looked around my office and made a quiet promise to myself. I wouldn't rush into another emotional confrontation. This time I would rely on patience, preparation, and the truth. When the time came, facts would speak louder than hurt feelings ever could. Over the next 2 weeks, my life looked completely ordinary to anyone watching from the outside. I met clients, managed my agency, and spent quiet evenings with Graham. When my mother called, I answered politely but kept every conversation short. She seemed relieved that I wasn't arguing about the inheritance, never realizing I was preparing for something much bigger than an emotional confrontation. I worked closely with Ivy and Foster, gathering every document that could prove the truth. We collected records of the money I had transferred to my father when the dealership struggled, copies of the hospital bills I had paid for my mother's surgery, and the financing agreement showing my role as a co-signer during the dealership's restructuring. Foster also prepared certified copies of my grandmother's trust and the documents confirming my ownership interest in the business. While reviewing everything, Ivy uncovered another important detail. Several months before the family dinner, my father had secured a large loan to keep Weston's branch of the dealership operating. The loan placed the family's financial future in a far more difficult position than anyone had admitted. Suddenly, the timing of the inheritance announcement made much more sense. The more I learned, the clearer the picture became. My parents hadn't simply decided to reward my siblings. They believed I would continue helping whenever they needed me, even after being left out of their plans. They counted on my silence because I had never given them a reason to expect anything different. That realization hurt more than the dinner itself. Instead of reacting with anger, I decided to create an opportunity for everyone to hear the full truth together. I called my mother and asked if we could have another family dinner the following Saturday. I told her I wanted us all to move forward peacefully after discussing everything face to face. She happily agreed, convinced the conflict was already behind us. Before ending the call, I invited one additional guest, Foster Bramwell. I introduced him only as someone helping me with important paperwork. My parents had no idea why he would be there, and I intended to keep it that way until everyone was seated around the same table where my story had first begun. The second family dinner began almost exactly like the first. My mother welcomed everyone with the same warm smile. The dining table was covered with familiar dishes, and ordinary conversation filled the room. If someone had walked in without knowing the past 2 weeks, they would have believed we were simply sharing another peaceful weekend meal. Foster arrived with Graham and me a few minutes after everyone else. My father greeted him politely, assuming he was simply a friend helping with paperwork. Although my mother looked slightly confused, she said nothing and invited everyone to sit down. After dinner was served, I waited until every plate was nearly empty before speaking. I asked everyone here because there are a few things our family needs to hear, I said calmly. The room became silent. I opened my folder and placed several documents on the table. One by one, I explained the financial help I had quietly given over the years. I showed records of the money that kept my father's employees paid during a difficult Christmas season. I presented proof that I had covered thousands of dollars for my mother's medical expenses. Then I reminded everyone about the dealership loan I had co-signed years earlier. No one interrupted. Foster carefully explained that my legal responsibilities also gave me legal rights regarding the business. My father slowly lowered his eyes toward the paperwork, knowing every page was accurate. Then I revealed my grandmother's letter. I explained how Opal had created a private trust and protected her ownership share of the dealership long before anyone discussed dividing the family estate. Foster confirmed that everything had legally transferred to me after her passing and had never been part of my parents' inheritance plans. My mother's face lost its color. Weston stared at the table without speaking. Even Marlowe, who usually had an opinion about everything, remained completely silent. Finally, Weston looked at me and quietly asked, "Why didn't you ever tell us any of this?" I met his eyes without raising my voice. "Because none of you ever asked." Those simple words settled over the room more heavily than every document lying on the table. For the first time in years, nobody could deny the truth or pretend they had never seen it. No one spoke for several long moments after my answer. The silence felt different from the one at the first dinner. Back then I had been the only person left speechless. This time, everyone else was searching for words while I finally felt calm. My father leaned back in his chair and let out a slow breath. His shoulders looked heavier than I had ever seen them. "I should have told all of you the truth," he admitted. He confessed that the dealership's financial problems were far more serious than anyone realized. Weston's branch had continued losing money, and the latest bank loan had placed the family home at risk if the payments fell behind. The inheritance announcement had not been as simple as rewarding one child over another. My parents were also trying to protect the business from falling apart. Then he looked directly at me. "I thought you'd keep helping us," he said quietly. "You always have." Those words hurt more than any argument could have. They showed that my years of generosity had become an expectation instead of something appreciated. My mother wiped away tears before speaking. She admitted she had always believed I was strong enough to take care of myself. Because I rarely complained and always found solutions, she assumed I needed less love, less support and fewer opportunities than my brother and sister. "I never realized how unfair that was," she whispered. Weston finally broke his silence. He admitted he had accepted my parents' decisions without asking questions because it was easier than facing the truth. Marlowe lowered her head, unable to defend the years she had depended on everyone else. I listened without interrupting. Their honesty mattered, but it could not erase everything that had happened. When my father asked what I planned to do next, I answered honestly. "I don't want revenge," I said. "I want respect. From now on, every decision involving this family and the dealership will be transparent. If I choose to help again, it will be because I freely decide to, not because everyone assumes I always will." No one argued. For the first time in my life, my family wasn't looking at me as the dependable daughter who would quietly fix every problem. They were finally seeing me as someone whose voice deserved to be heard before any decision was made. The weeks after that dinner brought changes I never expected. Nothing transformed overnight, but the way my family treated one another slowly began to shift. The truth had forced everyone to face realities they had ignored for years, and pretending everything was normal was no longer possible. Weston surprised me the most. Instead of acting as though he deserved complete control of the dealership, he admitted he needed help understanding the business. For the first time, he asked for my advice instead of assuming I would quietly solve problems behind the scenes. I agreed to work with him, but only under clear conditions. Every financial decision would be documented, every responsibility shared honestly, and every agreement reviewed by Ivy and Foster. There would be no more private promises or hidden expectations. Marlowe struggled much more with the changes. She believed I had embarrassed the family by bringing legal documents to dinner. She insisted the inheritance decision had never been hers and argued that I was making everyone suffer for our parents' mistakes. I understood why she felt that way, but I also knew accountability often feels unfair to people who have rarely faced consequences. My mother slowly began reaching out without asking for favors. Sometimes she called simply to ask how my week had been or to invite Graham and me over for coffee. Those conversations felt unfamiliar, but they were genuine, and that mattered more than perfect words. My father worked closely with the attorneys to reorganize the dealership's finances. This time he shared every update openly instead of keeping important information hidden until problems became impossible to ignore. The family home also remained safe, although the ownership structure changed completely. My grandmother's trust, my legal interest in the dealership, and the revised financial agreements created a fair arrangement that reflected each person's responsibilities rather than old assumptions. Looking back, I realized I hadn't won because someone else had lost. I had won because the truth finally had a place at our family's table. No one could overlook my contributions anymore, and no future decision would be made without my knowledge or my voice. A year passed before I realized how much my life had changed. The pain from that first dinner had not disappeared completely, but it no longer controlled me. I could sit at my parents' table without remembering every word of that announcement. I had finally stopped measuring my worth by what my family decided to give me. My grandmother's ownership stake remained protected under my name, and I treated it as a responsibility rather than a trophy. Weston continued running the dealership, but our relationship was different now. He no longer called expecting me to rescue him. When he needed advice, he asked. When I offered help, we discussed it openly and treated it like a real business decision. My relationship with my mother also changed. She became more intentional about staying connected with me. Our conversations were sometimes awkward, especially when old memories surfaced, but they were honest. She no longer assumed I was fine simply because I appeared strong. Marlo was the hardest relationship to rebuild. She had spent years believing our parents' support was something she could always depend on, so losing that safety net forced her to confront parts of herself she had avoided. We weren't suddenly close, but we began speaking without the resentment that had once filled every conversation. The biggest change, however, happened inside me. I stopped believing that constantly solving problems made me more deserving of love. For years, I had measured my place in the family by how much I could provide. If someone needed money, I helped. If there was a crisis, I showed up. If someone made a mistake, I quietly cleaned it up. I finally understood that generosity without boundaries can become invisible. Graham noticed the difference too. One evening, he reminded me that I had never needed to shout to make myself heard. I had simply gathered the truth, protected myself, and allowed everyone else to face it. Whenever I thought about Opal's old folder, I remembered why she had trusted me with it. She hadn't left me a weapon against my family. She had left me the freedom to choose my own future. And that was what I kept. I kept my business, my independence, my grandmother's legacy, and the relationships worth rebuilding. What I finally let go of was the need to prove that I deserved a place at my own family's table. 18 months after that first dinner, I sat at the same table and realized I no longer felt like an outsider. The room looked almost identical, but I was different. I had learned that sometimes the most painful betrayal can become the moment you finally understand what you deserve. My parents still lived in the house, but the family arrangements had changed. Weston continued running the dealership with proper oversight and, for the first time, understood that ownership meant responsibility. Marlo was building a life without depending on everyone else to solve her problems. Neither transformation happened instantly, but both had begun because the truth could no longer be ignored. As for me, I continued running my agency with Graham beside me. I still helped my family when I genuinely wanted to, but I no longer gave automatically. If money or business decisions were involved, everything was discussed openly. I had learned that boundaries weren't punishment. They were protection. My grandmother's words stayed with me. She once told me I was holding up the roof while everyone else argued over the furniture. For years, I thought being strong meant carrying that weight without complaint. Now I understood something different. Strength also meant knowing when to put the weight down. I never received the inheritance my parents originally announced for Weston and Marlo, and strangely, I stopped caring about it. What I gained was worth far more. I gained clarity, independence, and the courage to stop accepting a role my family had chosen for me. That first dinner taught me where I stood. The second one taught my family that I could no longer be overlooked. If you've stayed with Harper's story from that first painful announcement to this moment, thank you. Tell me in the comments what you would have done if your family had treated you the same way. And if this story meant something to you, subscribe for more stories about betrayal, courage, and finding your voice when the people closest to you refuse to hear it. My story ends here, but I'd love to hear your thoughts. What would you have done if your own family had treated you the way mine did? Leave a comment below, and if you want to hear more powerful stories like mine, be sure to subscribe.